Good morning, everyone. It is exactly 9 o'clock. I'm Deb Henton, the Executive Director of MASA, and I welcome all of you today to this outstanding virtual opportunity we have for you to learn more about the new school legislation, the safety legislation in Minnesota, and how you can comply with that as school district leaders. We especially welcome our colleagues from MESPA and MASSP, all of the principals and other staff that are joining us today. We really appreciate being able to collaborate with your organizations to offer this opportunity. Joining us today, the presenters are Dr. James Densley and Dr. Jillian Peterson from Hamline University. They are well known in the world of violence prevention, and they reached out to us to suggest this webinar, and we are truly grateful for their participation and their expertise and what they're going to share with us today. Also with us will be Miss Blair Friedman. She is from Sandy Hook Promise. You will see her on the screen, and available for questions from Sandy Hook Promise will be Aurora Vasquez. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Densley and Dr. Peterson.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. We are delighted to be here and part of this program here today. The purpose of this presentation is to introduce and to explain and walk through some of the new school safety legislation that was passed in recent years in the state of Minnesota. In order to do that work, though, we need to contextualize exactly why this legislation even exists and to walk through some of the research that grounds the work that follows. So my task is going to be to provide a little bit of that research context before handing it over to my colleague Jillian Peterson, who is going to talk specifically about the new active shooter legislation. And then we'll hand over to our colleagues at Sandy Hook Promise, who are going to put broader contextualization around violence prevention, which is also another key component of the new legislation. So without further ado, we will get into this. If Jillian would like to advance the next slide, please.
Yeah, sorry, for some reason I am frozen.
Oh.
Let's see. Maybe I'll try resharing.
And if not, I can do that too.
Yeah, we'll see if this works. Yeah, no, it's not letting me move the slides.
If you've clicked into the Zoom window, you would have to click into the PowerPoint if you're.
Oh, okay, we're good. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Great. So Jillian and I come from a sort of interdisciplinary perspective when we think about violence prevention. Jillian is a psychologist by training, and I'm a sociologist by training. We are both, however, professors of criminology and criminal justice. And so we are coming at this challenge of violence in society from multiple different angles. And we founded a research center, which is now housed at Hamline University, called the Violence Prevention Project. It's a research center that's dedicated to reducing violence through research, but it's not just a think tank or a research center aimed at academics. It's much more geared toward action and really translating research into the hands of practitioners like yourselves. And so this presentation here today is right within our wheelhouse and exactly what we like to be doing. We really want to inform policy decisions and then how to put policy into practice. Now, we're perhaps best known for our research on the lives of mass shooters, which is documented in this book, The Violence Project: How to Stop a Mass Shooting Epidemic. This was funded by a 2-year grant from the National Institute of Justice, where we built a database of public mass shooters, but we also interviewed the shooters themselves in prison and anybody who knew them. So this included survivors of mass shootings, first responders, victims' families, and then also the parents, siblings, and friends of the mass shooters themselves. It was a 360-degree look at the lives of mass shooters. And there's 2 key takeaways I want to share with you from that research, which help ground our work going forward. Number 1 is there seems to be a prevailing wisdom that mass shooters are monsters, madmen, and therefore impossible to stop. The challenge with some of that language around mass shootings is it makes us feel very helpless and hopeless when we discuss prevention strategies. But actually, the key thing that we learned in our research is that before any mass shooter ever perpetrated their crime, they were, of course, somebody's son, brother, sibling, family member, friend, colleague, and they were known as that human being until that very moment where their lives changed so dramatically. And so it's about putting some of the humanity back into our violence prevention strategies, which brings us to the title of the last chapter of the book, which is Hope. As I mentioned, when we label mass shooters as monsters, it becomes very hopeless. We're sort of waiting for a solution that just doesn't feel tangible. What our research shows is that these types of attacks are actually preventable. And our goal here today is to work toward that overall outcome of prevention. So to do that, we're going to ground this in some research. Public mass shootings where 4 or more people have been killed in a school setting are actually rare events. And that's the good news. There have only been 15 of these in our data, which goes all the way back to 1966. However, the names on this map in front of you will be very, very familiar. Right here in Minnesota, for instance, the tragedy in Red Lake. Our colleagues at Sandy Hook Promise, they exist because of the tragedy in Newtown, Connecticut. And then again, Parkland, Columbine, Uvalde. These names spring to mind and they evoke such terrible tragedy and trauma in those communities. But it's our learning from those events that helps us again move toward a strategy of prevention. So first and foremost, it's a recognition that school shooters tend to be insiders of the schools that they target. They are themselves school children. They're not these scary monsters and outsiders that we don't know. They are people that are right in front of us every single day. They tend to be teenagers. So what we're talking about here is prevention targeted toward the teenagers in our school buildings, recognizing them and meeting them where they're at as teenagers. Secondly, these are teenagers who are in a crisis. Nobody who perpetrates a mass shooting is living their best lives. And that crisis is incredibly noticeable. And that again is also important. Tends to be, as we define it, a marked change in behavior from their baseline. If you've got a student who's always angry and then they come to school and they're angry, that's not a marked change in baseline, that's just another day at school. But if you've got a student who's thriving and then all of a sudden is not, that is a change in baseline and it's an opportunity to recognize when to intervene. Those crisis signs, whether it's mood swings or agitation or depression or losing touch with reality, it's often rooted in an early childhood trauma that has gone unaddressed. And it starts to fester to a point where it becomes a grievance, where the school becomes the target for that grievance. And so we have to recognize students are in crisis and we have to work with them accordingly. Now, thirdly, that crisis is often an existential crisis and often a suicidal crisis. A mass shooting is very much intended to be a final act. There's no getting away with a mass shooting. In fact, the vast majority end in the death of the perpetrator, whether they've taken their own lives or it's been taken for them by law enforcement. Recognizing that the shooting is a final act, like in the words of this mass shooter on the screen in front of us. Why did they shoot the school? Quote, because I knew if I fired on the school, the police would show up and they would shoot and kill me. Because every time I had tried suicide in the previous year, I'd screwed it up. Recognizing that this is not just an act of homicide or violence, it's also an act of suicide, changes the way we think about prevention. What can we learn from suicide prevention that's applicable in this context? Now, next is the fact that when somebody is going through that level of crisis, when they're thinking about taking their own lives and taking the lives of others, they're often telegraphing that in advance. Our research shows that people are threatening violence, they're communicating it to friends and colleagues as a last cry for help. This is important because it means we have to treat threats seriously, but it also means that we don't necessarily have to treat threats criminally and just to punish them as if that is going to solve the underlying challenge. We have to think about a way in which we address the severity of the situation that is going to be in the best interests of that student and the broader community around the school, so that we get optimal outcomes from the way we address these problems. This telegraphing, by the way, can happen in person, it can happen on social media, and it's important that you are that trusted adult in the room that can hear this and respond appropriately. The final piece of this is that by virtue of age, these young people tend to get their firearms from adults. They're unable to purchase them legally. And so there's an onus on us as the adults in and around these school buildings to not leave firearms lying around where they could be procured by young people, and to be monitoring our young people's behavior so that they don't have access to firearms to perpetrate these crimes. So, in summary of these things, a recognition that what we need for a recipe for prevention, recognizing young people are insiders. So, the physical security aspects of this are going to be insufficient alone to solve this problem. It's not something you can just solve with a metal detector and a few cameras. We have to recognize the human aspect of this. That human aspect is really tied into the signs of the crisis and the need for crisis intervention. If this is intended to be a final act, recognize it as such. Suicide prevention is going to be much more important than just outright punishment for any threats or behaviors that come through. We need reporting systems and relationships so that when people are telegraphing this violence and leaking it to their peers, we know how to respond appropriately. And then through education and secure storage, ensuring that the opportunity for this level of violence doesn't present itself. So with that, I want to contextualize that this pathway to violence is something that's often rooted in early childhood trauma that moves through a crisis point to a point where somebody is starting to seriously think about this level of violence, and then recognizing that mass shootings are scripted in our society. There's inspiration for this type of violence everywhere you turn, in media and social media, and in the darkest corners of the internet, where mass shooters are heroized and celebrated. And so we often think about trying to prevent this on the very back end, the opportunity, make sure somebody doesn't get a firearm. But there's so much more we can be doing on those other steps to also prevent this violence. And that's something that I think Sandy Hook Promise is going to be talking about in a lot more detail, about how you recognize those signs of a crisis and you prevent that radicalization process that gets you to violence in the first place. So that's the research on why we're doing what we're doing and why it's so important. And now Jillian's going to contextualize why we came with active shooter drills in our society and the implications for that. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for being here this morning. So drills, to be honest, we don't have a ton of research. They became really commonplace after the Columbine shootings in 1999 as a way for schools to feel like they were doing something, to feel like they were prepared. And in Minnesota, schools are required, I believe, to run 5 some sort of drill per year. They can include students, they cannot include students, they can be active shooter drills, lockdown drills, schools call them all sorts of different things. It's really hard to know if drills work because of course we can't design any sort of randomized controlled trial, and mass shootings are really quite rare events. So what we can do is we can do drills, we can ask students and teachers how they feel afterwards, and that's kind of what we know. So what we know is that there is evidence that drills can make students feel more prepared. Especially older students can say, going through a drill makes me feel like I would know what to do if this was going to happen. At the same time, students also report that drills make them feel a lot more fearful about mass shootings and a lot more anxious about them occurring. And students will talk about the experience of kind of having to go through a drill, rehearse essentially for somebody coming and trying to kill them in math class, and then go right back to a math lesson, right? And that transition being really hard for young people. We've really put a lot of this on the kids in our buildings to have to rehearse and train for this, which is weighing heavy on them. And then finally, more and more research is emerging that drills can be quite traumatic for some students, specifically if it's students who have experienced gunfire, who have post-traumatic stress disorder, who maybe are on the autism spectrum, who have different level of sensory needs. There are students where drills can really have a significant impact on their functioning. Other concerns that have emerged from the research is the fact that James mentioned 94% of perpetrators are students, which means they are running through the same drills as everyone else. And I don't think we tend to think about that, is that those potential perpetrators are being trained in the school's response, which also brings up concerns around social contagion, right? If you have somebody who's suicidal, who's in crisis, who's not doing well, who's disconnected, running through a realistic school shooting drill could be highly problematic for them in terms of that social contagion piece. And then there's just this concern around the normalization of violence. How do we do drills in a way that's really age appropriate, that's not causing more harm than it might be protecting children from? So just from my own experience, I have 3 children. And I write about this in our book. When my kindergartner, my oldest, went through his first drill at school, he came home and just really nonchalantly told me that he had to sit on the carpet because it was in the middle of the room, and it's possible that bullets could come through their classroom windows, right? A 5-year-old reporting this, and he wasn't traumatized by it, which almost scared me more. That was just kind of part of his normal kindergarten experience, was practicing for bullets coming through windows. I also had experience last spring where I was driving carpool, and a 4th grader was in the car talking about how she got a new seating chart in class. And she said, the seating chart in my classroom really matters because if you're in the front row, you hide behind the teacher's desk during the drills. But if you're in the back 2 rows, you have to go to the coat room. So it could actually be a matter of life and death where our seating chart places us, right? Like, these are the thoughts that our young people are having on a daily basis when they're in schools. And so I think we really have to think about, how do we do this in a way that we're not causing long-term harm? So I'm going to walk through this new legislation. And I want to be clear, James and I are not policymakers. We didn't write this legislation, didn't have anything to do with getting it passed, honestly. So there will be questions as I'm talking. Please put those in the chat. We do have Aurora from Sandy Hook Promise, who was involved with writing and passing this legislation, and be able to kind of answer some of those more nuanced questions. James and I were just really excited about this legislation, and it's so unique. Minnesota is the first state to pass something like this, and it felt to us like this had really kind of flown under the radar, and that school leaders weren't necessarily aware that this had been passed. So we are going to put up at the end of this presentation a QR code for a survey that we would love for you to take, because as researchers, we're also really interested in what's hard about implementing this, what's easy, what are you already doing, what do you need to change? We are looking for some schools that we could potentially partner with and go to in this spring and see how these drills are working and what challenges there are. We kind of want to do an implementation analysis to see, is this working? Should other states be doing this? What are the challenges and problems with it? So first is, what is an active shooter drill? According to the statute, any emergency preparedness designed to teach students, teachers, school personnel, or staff how to respond in the event of an armed intruder on campus or an armed assailant in the immediate vicinity. So this could be a lockdown drill. This could be a safety drill. Yes, you could also be preparing for a wild animal in the building, but if you are doing something where you are drilling for an armed person being in this school, which every school is required to do, honestly, you're doing an active shooter drill and this stuff applies. So it doesn't necessarily matter what you call it. It matters what the students are actually doing. So every school should essentially have to comply with this. It's not the same as active shooter simulation, and I'll get to that. So a simulation is any sensory component. So anything where you're actually hearing gunshots, or where you're pretending to be an intruder and jiggling door handles, or where students are laying on the floor pretending to have been shot. Those are simulations, which are different than drills. So the next part of the statute says that active shooter drills have to be accessible, developmentally appropriate, and age appropriate, using appropriate safety language and vocabulary. So if you're talking to a 5-year-old about a drill versus a 17-year-old about a drill, you're having different language and different conversations. They have to be culturally aware, trauma informed, and inclusive of accommodations for students that have restrictions, which includes developmental, physical, sensory needs, mental health needs, auditory or visual limitations. Next, and this came from, as far as I understand, actual the students themselves who were involved with Sandy Hook Promise said it's really hard to just jump right back into school after we do a drill. So the next part of the legislation says that active shooter drill protocols must include a reasonable amount of time immediately following a drill for a teacher to debrief with their students. It has to provide students some time before regular classroom activity can occur. This could be many different things, a debrief. This could be for younger students, just a conversation about how they felt, if they had questions, how they're doing. It could be a brief walk outside. It could just be a 5-minute break. It could be journaling. It could be a small group discussion, but some amount of time to acknowledge what the children just went through and to make sure they're doing okay afterwards. So that is now a required piece of drilling. There also has to be an announcement before the drill that says it's a drill. Some of the most sort of damaging outcomes we know of is when a student doesn't realize the drill is real, or the drill is a drill, and thinks it might be real. And some schools do that, right? Because they want to surprise students. Those can be really traumatic if a student thinks that a school shooting is actually happening. So it has to be said, like, this is just a drill. Your life is not in danger. That announcement has to be made. The next piece of this says that a school district or charter school must give parents notice of an active shooter drill, ideally at least 24 hours ahead of time. So some sort of communication so parents know a drill is happening. That can help parents have conversations at home to prepare a student to know that this is going to happen today, to check in afterwards and ask how they were doing afterwards. It gives parents kind of a more active role in this. Part B of Part 4 says that a student must be able to opt out of participating in an active shooter drill. That doesn't mean they can opt out of knowing what to do, but the legislation says the Commissioner of Education must ensure the availability of alternative safety education for students opting out of participating, which might be simply a conversation about how to prepare rather than actively engaging in that drill. The next part of this bill says that a student can't be required to participate in an active shooter simulation. So if you're doing anything within the school where you're actually acting out, there's a sensory component to the drill, a legal guardian must have the opportunity to opt that student in. So instead of opting out, you have to opt in. So essentially, there's not a lot of evidence that shows that adding that sensory component is helpful. And that's where we actually see the most harmful outcomes for kids. So this is really meant to say, like, if you want to do those sensory outcomes, ideally do it when children aren't present. You can do that with the adults in the building, with teachers, with staff, so they know what to do. And our research would show actually the most important part of response when a school shooting actually occurs is having really good communication, because it's really hard to drill for exact scenarios. They all play out so differently. So having those systems of communication in the building is really important. But this piece of legislation is about sort of limiting student access to that simulation component. And then finally, and this is the piece that personally most excited about, it says, if we're going to be, forcing kids to rehearse for what to do when a school shooting happens, let's also tell kids how to prevent this from happening in the first place. We put so much time and energy into response, which is important, but we don't put that same sort of time and energy into prevention. And we really know there's so much we can be doing there. So the legislation said that a school district or chartered school conducting this type of drills must provide middle and high school students with at least 1 hour or a standard class period of violence prevention training. It has to talk about warning signs, signals that an individual might be at risk of hurting themselves or other people, the importance of taking threats seriously, reporting them and taking help. Because like James said, students who do this tell other students they're going to do it. That is who they tell. And we've studied, shootings where 60 kids in the building knew that a kid was threatening it and nobody told an adult. So how do we encourage that type of reporting behavior? You're not snitching, right? This is about seeking help for someone who's in trouble and who's in crisis. And then the steps that they can take to report this type of behavior. So that is what Blair's going to talk about be next after me, and then we'll go back and we'll talk about some of the work that James and I have been doing in this space as well. And then finally, the last piece of this says that a regularly scheduled board meeting, a school district that's conducted these drills has to have a conversation about the effectiveness of the active shooter drill on the safety of the students and the effect of those drills on the mental health and wellness of students and staff. So that should be happening yearly as well. There is also new reporting requirements, which just passed this last session, which says that school districts have to report to the Commissioner of Education incidents involving the use or possession of a dangerous weapon in school zones. And they also have to report after action reports for any active shooter incidents and active shooter threats to the Minnesota Fusion Center. This is really about data gathering. We do not have data on how often this is happening. We know from being in the field that schools are dealing with threats on a fairly regular basis, and schools are being put in an impossible position of having to deal with these threats, which they are designed to be institutions of education, not to be responding to these types of violent threats. But we've really put all that on schools, and we're not gathering data to know how often this is happening, how schools are responding, what resources they need, what training they need. So this is not about sort of like punishing schools, or this is truly about like, let's gather the data to know what school districts are dealing with, to know how we need to better resource them. This is one that James and I were a part of, this last legislation, and testified on behalf of it, just the importance of having this data so we know what we're doing. And with that, I will pause and turn it over to Blair to talk about promise as an option for that 1 hour of violence prevention training.
Thank you so much, Jillian, and also for the important
Someone's
work.
maybe not on mute.
As a holder, but I did not disable the actual
someone
fob
could turn
itself.
them
So
on.
as long as you have it and it's not floating out there. I'm good with it.
Are we able to do oh, perfect. Wonderful. Great. Thank you again, Jillian, and also for the really important work that you and James are doing. Before I get into Sandy Hook Promise's involvement with the legislation, for those of you who may not know, Sandy Hook Promise is a national nonprofit led by several family members that lost loved ones during the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting on December 14, 2012. And just a little bit of background about how we came to be. Soon after the tragedy, some of the family members got together to speak with experts in various fields, like Jillian and James, from threat assessment to psychologists to law enforcement, to understand how this could happen. And what they learned, as you've learned today, is that there are almost always warning signs ahead of time before an act of violence takes place, but that unfortunately there weren't the resources to educate the public on what they were. And that's when Sandy Hook Promise was created, to be that provider and to educate the public. to make sure that no other family member would have to experience the devastation that they did on that horrific day. So what we do and how we do it, you can go to the next slide, Jillian. So Sandy Hook Promise, we envision a future where children are free from shootings and active violence. Our mission is to educate and empower youth and adults to prevent violence in their schools, homes, and communities. The way that we protect children is by teaching the warning signs of potential violence and how to get help. We also research how to create more inclusive, supportive school cultures, and also advocate for policies designed to increase student safety in their schools, homes, and communities, like this very bill that we're discussing today. So not only are our programs that you're going to hear about based on ample research, but we also know that our programs are working due to the research that we have conducted. So we've partnered with the University of Michigan School of Public Health for years to study our programs, and they have found that they have significantly improved perceptions of school safety, perceptions of trusting relationships between youth and adults, and also willingness to report issues, as well as improved school climate. And so we know that upstream violence prevention strategies are the most effective ways to prevent gun violence, and we are working to increase these skills, attitudes, and knowledge of students every day. And I always like to share our impact as well, because it is really significant. As many of you know, with prevention, you often don't know what we prevent, but we are very fortunate to be able to confirm a lot of these interventions that have been made, and I'll just point you to a few, and you can obviously see the slide, but it's that we've helped over 5,800 students during a mental health crisis intervention, just like what James had mentioned, right? These occur, and when we're able to prevent them, we can change the whole pathway from happening. We've helped save over 1,000 students from suicide, and we've prevented at least 18 credible planned school shooting attacks. So again, we are very proud of these confirmed interventions, and our goal is to keep them up so that, again, we don't have to exist, right? So how do we achieve the type of impact that I mentioned, right? By educating and empowering as many people as we can. So Sandy Hook Promise's Know the Signs programs, they effectively teach youth and adults how to prevent violence, shootings, and other harmful acts by learning how to identify at-risk behaviors and intervene to get help. These early prevention measures empower everyone to help keep their schools safe and their communities. These programs are developmentally progressive, they're flexible, they're easy to use, and they also support social emotional development, skill exposure, practice, and transfer. So our Start with Hello, our Say Something, and our Say Promise clubs, they go beyond simple violence prevention programs because they build positive school culture and they focus on youth leadership, and we know that those are essential protective factors. So along with the programs that you'll hear about, we do have training and resources available, via different platforms. And they also are sustained and supported with student-led clubs, which I'll talk about, and also support from our partner success team. In terms of the overarching knowledge and skills learned in our curriculum, students are going to be learning how to do small yet powerful pro-social actions to reach out and help others. They're going to learn how to boost connectedness and belonging to one another and trusted adults. They're going to learn how to actually connect to those trusted adults and trusted peers. And you'll see this theme woven throughout, which is about building a community of upstanders, which I'm going to talk about in our Say Something program. Our Say Something program is a K-12 program that trains students to look for warning signs and threats, especially on social media, of somebody that might be at risk of hurting themselves or others, and how to speak to that trusted adult. We know that about over 76% of perpetrators of mass violence, they showed warning signs before, right? And other people could have seen these signs. But again, like I mentioned in the beginning, if we don't know what to look for, then we can't help. And so it is good news that these warning signs are happening, right? It sounds a little bit odd to say, but it's good news because we might have time to actually share what those are. So when we're looking at our Say Something program, you can go to the next slide. Our framework is comprised of 3 steps that students can take to keep them or their classmates safe. So that first one is to recognize warning signs and threats. I'll show you a list soon about some of the signs that will show them, but not only what those warning signs are, but also where they can be found. And if you guessed social media being the #1 place, you would be right. And then that next step is to act immediately and take it seriously. So again, this is where we focus a lot on that upstander mentality. We don't want our students to be a bystander. We want them to be an upstander and understand why it's important in keeping ourselves safe. But we also focus a lot in this step on the difference between snitching and saying something, because we know that that is a real barrier for students. And we teach them that the difference of saying something is to get somebody help, right? Not to help yourself by snitching. And so that's a really important theme that we spend time on. And then in that third step, to say something, the goal here is not for the student to be the expert or diagnose what they are seeing or hearing, but they are the eyes and ears of the school. So they can pass that really important information along to somebody who can help, a trusted adult. So as I mentioned, you can see some examples of warning signs of somebody who might be in crisis. I see the slide might be a little bit blurry. And of course, we give that context, right? Just like James had mentioned, these might be extreme changes that somebody is exhibiting. But for example, maybe there's a big change in personality or appearance, withdrawing from friends or activities, maybe a refusal to go to school. Maybe they're being verbally or physically abused. Maybe they're being cruel to animals, right? So again, if we don't know what to look for, it can be easy to miss these signs, often with, and sometimes really with tragic consequences. So that's one of, the first steps that we would do is make sure that the students actually can recognize what these signs are. And mentioned the trusted adults are an essential factor on this program. You could go to the next slide. We want our trusted adults to be the ones that get students help, right? We want them to go to them first so that they can help build that relationship as well, because we know that if students have strong relationships with trusted adults, that is going to build a better school climate in general and more positive perceptions of school safety. And we always say to educators as well that they might not even know if they are somebody's trusted adult. And so we often ask the students to be thinking about who their trusted adult is at the time of the program and the training. But we are often asking adults to think of the same thing about what it means for them to be somebody else's trusted adult. Say Something umbrella, we also have these two companion programs, which is first our Say Something Prevent Suicide. That is really the same as the core Say Something program, but we're talking specifically to the warning signs and risk factors specific to suicide. And we have training and resources tailored to each educators, parents, and students. But I also like to point out our the Being a Trusted Adult training. I think this is new to us, and this is a really important training because it's an interactive workshop that deepens the Say Something program by helping educators, parents, and community leaders better help students who speak up about seeing warning signs, right? A lot of times what we heard from the youth that we work with is that I was brave, I took that information, I said something to a trusted adult, but maybe they didn't get the response that felt like it was affirming or that it was being handled, and then it didn't necessarily go as planned. And so if we can train anyone and everyone in our schools to be a trusted adult by helping them learn skills and having a common language around how to best listen, respond, reassure, and follow up with concerns with a trauma-informed approach, then we know that we can build those relationships more strongly inside the school and out as well. And then also, as a component to our Say Something program, we know that maintaining the safety of your students and school communities also depends on timely information, and that students are the first to be aware of safety threats, bullying, victimization, or a classmate at risk. And so also is listed on the Minnesota Department of Education Violence Prevention and Intervention resources. It lists that one of the key factors of violence prevention is establishing and utilizing reporting mechanisms. And so we also have a Say Something Anonymous reporting system, which allows students in grades 4th through 12th to share a concern privately and safely. It allows for intervention and assistance before a crisis occurs. We know that, again, we really encourage students to go to a trusted adult first, but we also know that sometimes that's not always available to a student, and we want to make sure that we offer this option as well, so that no matter what, a warning sign is being shared. And our system really is the only anonymous reporting system that offers a complete school safety solution. And that's because we have multiple reporting options. So you'll see on this slide, mobile, tech, mobile app, text, phone, hotline, website. And they have 24/7, 365 access to a caring, trusted adult. And that's because we have a national accredited crisis center that is staffed with highly trained crisis centers. This is not a call center. These are people that go through hundreds of hours of training so that they can be somebody that the students are comfortable reaching out to, and they can be that first line of defense before they share that information back with district administrators. And so, as mentioned, we've had a lot of saved lives through this program, but we know as this is an important component of the statute as well, wanted to make sure that you knew that that was also available to you from Sandy Hook Promise. And then our next program, the statute also states that a school district or charter school must ensure that students have the opportunity to contribute to their school safety, violence prevention planning, and have opportunities for leadership related to prevention and safety so that they can we can encourage and support them in this work. And so we already have a wonderful model for that, our Save Promise Club, Students Against Violence Everywhere. A lot of people are often asking, how do we get the students interested in this program and in this work? And we know that we're going to be most effective by having our peers lead the way. They're the ones that know their schools and communities. They know the intimate issues that their peers are having. And so what we do at Sandy Hook Promise is whether they are an existing club or a new club, this can be embedded in something else that already exists. We share resources and opportunities for them to, again, not have to reinvent the wheel, but to really customize it at their own. But we give them strategies on how to do that. So this is a great opportunity for youth to really lead the way. And again, for us to have an option really focused on youth advocacy and youth leadership. I shared a lot about our programs. I did not speak as much about our Start with Hello program. That is super important. I will just give you a high level. That is our early violence prevention program that is focused on reducing social isolation and how to build more connected schools and communities. It is super important because we know that, especially like Dr. Densley said, is that if a school shooter has a grievance around their school, right? That is one of those situations that might lead them to have an act of violence on campus. This helps us create more welcoming schools and communities for everyone. And so our Start with Hello program is as early as you can get on the upstream violence prevention stream, where we are teaching students how to reduce social isolation, how to build more connected schools and communities for everyone. The reason I'm focusing more on our Say Something program today is because this program really meets the minimum requirement for the violence prevention training mandate and is a direct one-to-one on what the statute is asking for. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like, really on a minimum level, because we understand you all are busy. We hope that you will go deeper in our programs, but we know that that's not always feasible, right? And so I want to make sure that you can walk away learning how to meet that hour. And so the way that we recommend is that you deliver our Say Something training using a video. That is a 23-minute video that you can download from our Learning Center that you can share with your students 6th through 12th grade. We also have an elementary. The bill is about middle school and high schoolers, but I do know that we have some elementary administrators here. So I just want you to know there's something for you as well. And then coupled with that 23-minute long video, we have lesson plans in units that your schools and districts and even individual grade levels can then select to personalize the content more to their needs for that second half of the hour requirement. So for example, we have a warning signs unit where students can go deeper to answer the question, what do I do when I notice warning signs? So across grade levels, students are unpacking a variety of warning signs. At the elementary level, they're practicing identifying what a warning sign is and what it is not. And they're learning to differentiate from everyday conflict and confrontation. At the middle school and high school level, their class discussions around underlying causes of bullying, unpacking that stigma around snitching, and again, lessons activities including discussing more concerning online warning signs and investigating the common barriers to safety and belonging. So again, that allows you all to really customize the work and help that training go deeper. So again, you have the video and coupled along with a lesson plan of your choosing, and that will meet that 1 hour or classroom period activity. You can do it all at once, but you can also do it at different times as well. And this structure also allows for that as if you don't want to do it all at one time. Okay, so why use Sandy Hook Promise, I obviously have to plug it because we think it's important. And again, our goal is just for you all to do violence prevention and to meet this statute. But we want you to know, we understand you have a choice when you do decide which programs you use. But I do want you to know the resources that I mentioned are available to you at no cost. We never want budget to be a barrier and get in the way of child safety. So we have a number of funding models that allow us to reduce that burden on you all. These are light lift programs, right? So you can meet the requirement, but you can also go much deeper to really make sure that this is part of your school's and district culture. We have clear alignment with Minnesota social and emotional learning standards developed by CASEL. Our materials and resources reflect values around race, equity, diversity, inclusion. They also align with the Learning for Justice social standards. They are trauma informed, multi-tier system of support. And again, we have a large library of resources that are growing year after year so that if you decide to do that training every year, you can change that content and grow the program with you for each grade level to make sure that, again, it's growing with your students' needs. So I just shared a lot with you, but if you have any questions, I know we'll have some time at the end. If you are interested in learning more, my contact information is above, and I'd be happy to share how we can bring these programs to your schools or districts. So I appreciate it, and I will hand it back over to you, Jillian.
Thank you so much, Blair. I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about some other resources kind of available or some work that James and I have done. This is a project that we did with the St. Paul Public Schools. This is kind of a deeper dive where we got a 3-year grant to build a violence prevention system in the St. Paul Public Schools that we called a care team. It's essentially threat assessment, but it's really much more focused on a holistic kind of softer threat assessment. It's multidisciplinary teams, just like threat assessment teams. We built a district level team, and then we built individual teams at every school, elementary, middle, and high school, that meet regularly, where if you're worried about students, that behavior is reported to the team. They try different interventions. If it gets to be beyond the school's resources, it's kicked up to the district level team. And we are just finishing our evaluation of that process right now. This is a model that we'd love to see in other schools and other districts. Please feel free to reach out to us if it's something that's of interest to you. Unfortunately, we cannot offer our services for free. We just don't have those resources. However, there is external funding and grant funding available that we've gone after with different school districts interested in building this kind of infrastructure. So we've done things like audit of system processes, analyzing school district data, looking at violence prevention, behavioral health, and threat assessment systems, deep dives into research like discipline data, referral data, trends over time, interviews and focus groups and school climate surveys, and then implemented and evaluated tailored systems. We've also done a lot of training around things like crisis intervention, suicide prevention, warning signs. This is the model that we developed. We actually developed this with the teacher whose classroom was targeted in the Red Lake mass shooting. She was integral in helping us put together this process, Missy Dodds. Very similar threat assessment, but it's called the R model: ready, respond, refer, and revisit. And it's really focused on looking beyond just threats and really seeing students who are in crisis and need of care and intervention. And this is one type of training that we do for teachers specifically. This can be really useful. This is a quick kind of crisis intervention and de-escalation training focused on things like managing yourself, managing the environment, nonverbal de-escalation techniques, verbal de-escalation techniques. One thing we know from our research on mass shootings is that these are preventable. These are students and young people who are actively suicidal, who are in crisis, and we think of them as kind of a balloon ready to pop, and you have to just take some of the air out of that balloon. When we've done interviews with perpetrators of school shootings and we've said, is there anything or anyone who would have stopped you? They always say yes. So these are preventable if we know the warning signs, we know how to make those connections, we know how to get students through crisis. And this is the work we'd love to be a part of in Minnesota. So I put my email address down there if you're interested in having a further conversation about what this could look like in your school. this is that survey I told you about. So we would love if you could take just 2 minutes here and let us know what you already knew about this legislation, what was new for you, what you're already doing in your school, what you're going to have to change, and if you'd be interested in partnering with us on some research and evaluation work around this new legislation. That would be wonderful. So I will just leave that up and open up the last 10 minutes to questions. So if you have a question, if you could just put it in the chat, that would be wonderful. And it looks like the questions so far I'm seeing, we will absolutely make these slides available. No problem. Could I put this survey link in the chat? Yeah, James, are you able to do that quick? All right, there it is.
Yeah, just put it in.
Good question. Any other questions we can answer? This was a lot of information. You are welcome. There still appears to be confusion around the statewide lockdown drills and the active shooter drill. I don't know, Aurora, if you want to jump in on that one.
Sure. Without additional context on what that confusion is, what I will offer is that the measure of what one is doing is not what you call it. A lockdown drill, a crisis drill, a shooter on campus drill. I'm giving you all the names that I've heard from schools that I've worked with around the country for these types of drills. The measure, or what one wants to focus on, is what you are preparing the students for by undertaking the drill, no matter what you call it. If in doing that, you're preparing students to respond in the event of an armed shooter on the campus or in the vicinity, then you are doing what the law calls an active shooter drill. Again, you could call it whatever you want to call it, or whatever existing law references. The interesting thing about Minnesota, and it's not uncommon in other states, is that when the underlying law calls for something like lockdown drills, or it might call for something like crisis drills, there is most often not a definition for what that means, right? And so what happens is that schools do a thing, an activity, and they say, this is, in Minnesota's case, the lockdown drill I'm required to do as a school to meet the requirements of the law. And then the next school, the next county over, the next district over, does something entirely different and says, this is our version of a lockdown drill meeting the requirement of that. So what this law does is it creates the point of nexus, I would say, for an activity that meets the definition in the law without regard to what it's called. And so I hope that helps. Think about what you're doing and look at the language in the law. If what you're doing is what the law says is an active shooter drill, then it's an active shooter drill. You can call it a lockdown drill if you'd like, but under the law, it will fall into the expectations of an active shooter drill.
So this is Rick Kaufman. I was the one that asked the question. And I think the confusion arises with the active shooter drill, the one that both Dr. Jillian Peterson and Dr. Densley spoke to with respect to an active shooter event, where it's a full-blown kind of drill, which makes total sense of why students shouldn't be involved in that. In Minnesota, like many states, are required to do 5 lockdown drills. Now, lockdown, I know when you talk about the terminology, lockdown can be used for lots of different, the drill can be used for lots of different scenarios. If what the law says, because what some of the legislators that I've spoken to, interpretation is that in many respects, you're asking schools to, for those 5 lockdown drills, to notify parents to 24 hours before that drill. You're providing students with the opportunity to opt out of a drill that does provide specifically for what to do to protect oneself, whether they are in a secured location or not in a secured location. And the opt-outs have the potential to put a student into harm's way with the inability to know what to do. Because what we know is that when students practice drills in the right way, that they're aware of, it's not intended to create more anxiety. They're informed, all the kinds of things that we as security directors preach over and over. Inability of students to know what to do puts students in more harm's way. And so I think that's the confusion, is these active shooter events, ASE training situations, as compared to a lockdown drill or any number of drills that assimilate to why you would call for a lockdown or lockout.
Yes. So yes to all of that, right? And I know that might sound like a surprising response. So there's a portion in the law that says if for students that opt out, for whatever reason, right? Maybe it's like a parent saying, I can't have my student participating tomorrow because yesterday evening they broke a leg, and so they'll be in school, but they can't participate in this thing. Or if it's a parent who says, something traumatic just happened to my student last night, grandma died very unexpectedly, and so their mental health is a little fragile today, not tomorrow. Those students, including students who are opted out because they cannot participate in the manner in which the active shooter drill is done, will fall under the portion of the law that calls on training. We refer to them as tabletop exercises. So they still need to be trained on what to do in the event of an emergency. To your point, exactly. We want them to have the information and what they will do when an active shooter scenario unfolds in their school. So there are options in the law for how to cover precisely that. To the point of doing 5 lockdown drills and having all the new protocols for an active shooter drill fall into each of those 5 lockdown drills, the answer there is it depends, right? So if all 5 of the lockdown drills a school is doing or a district does are about active shooter drills, then yes, you have to do what the law says all 5 times. But I want to acknowledge that not everybody is doing active shooter scenarios under the banner of lockdown drill. And we have an example of that in the comments where someone posted, and thank you, that they use their lockdown drill requirement, right, to do for medical emergencies to clear the hallway, but they don't focus on active shooters. So
Right,
in that scenario, that lockdown drill would not be impacted by this law.
Right, that's the whole point I'm trying to make, is that the ambiguity is when you say lockdown can be used for an active shooter scenario, and in many cases, in today's trainings that we do, it is for any number of types of where the school needs to go into a lockdown situation that does not involve an active shooter. That's that gray area in the law that schools continue to be confused by, this notification, the opt-outs, and the other provisions of the law.
Gotcha. I think so it sounds like it's going to take a little while for folks to kind of wrap their head around what this means. Now, if current lockdown drills are being done to train students for multiple scenarios at once, like a one-time multifaceted lockdown drill, then it would seem to me that because of this new law, that lockdown drills should be disaggregated and just be one event focused. So for example, a lockdown drill that does nothing but, I'm sorry, I keep looking at the comments, that is for nothing but medical emergencies. And however that looks, and has nothing to do with an armed intruder on campus. A lockdown drill that focuses on nothing but a chemical spill in the neighborhood or within the school and does not do anything with respect to an armed intruder on campus. A lockdown drill that is just about there's a bank being robbed in the neighborhood, and so we have to lock the school down for safety purposes because there's some type of high-level criminal activity happening in the neighborhood, but is not teaching the students anything with respect to how to react to an armed intruder on campus. And then you could have a lockdown drill, because y'all have to do 5, a separate lockdown drill that's teaching students how to respond in the event of an armed intruder on campus. That lockdown drill would fall under the requirements of the new law. But the other lockdown drills I just described would not be touched by the new law, not the notice provisions, not the debrief provisions, not the opt-in or opt-out provisions. The new law will only attach when the thing you're doing is teaching students to respond to an active shooter on campus or an active shooter, trying to get into the school, for example.
Thank you,
So that's one
Aurora,
way.
so much
Awesome.
for those detailed explanations. And Dr. Peterson, Dr. Densley, and Blair, we thank you so much for all the information you provided. Unfortunately, our time is up. It is 10:01. And you gave us so much to think about, and you also gave us contact information. So would it be okay if there's further questions about the distinction that Aurora was talking about and Mr. Kaufman was talking about, if people could follow up with you?
Certainly. You can certainly follow up with Sandy Hook Promise, and I'll let Jillian and speak for herself. I think she shared her information.
Yes, absolutely. And I just wanted to mention, I still think we're figuring out this distinction in the law. Like, I do think this is evolving and confusing, right? Because if it's a medical emergency drill, but you're having students hide in silence in a hole in the closet, then is that really for a medical? So I do think we're still flushing this out. So thank you, Aurora. I'm so glad you were here to help clarify that. And yes, my email address is certainly right there. Please reach out.
Okay, again, thanks to all the participants and especially the presenters. We learned so much today, and we'd like to continue partnering with you in the future. So much appreciated. And there is another session on Thursday, should people want to join again, correct?
Yes.
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 Thursday.
All right. So 11 a.m. on Thursday is another possibility. If you need to have that link, please don't hesitate to contact MASA. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.